Welcome to another edition of Kentucky Farm Bureau's Candid Conversation. I'm Tim Thornberry, editor of the Kentucky Farm Bureau News. As you can tell, we're coming to you from the old RV again. We are we're still going by our regulations and staying socially distant, I think is the proper terminology these days. We hope you're staying safe out there too. Our guest today is Kenny Burdine. He is a livestock specialist with the University of Kentucky. Kenny, I hope I've said all that right. I think most of farm folks know you and know your title, but whenever I have a question about livestock, beef cattle in this state, this is the guy I go to. So Kenny, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to visit with you.
Good to visit with you. I know that we are in some crazy times here with this pandemic and what it's done to the markets. Kenny, talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, it's obviously hit everything pretty hard across the board. I guess the way I've kind of described it to some folks, it's almost like there's been three phases. There was kind of the phase January, mostly February, when the market impact was mostly about exports. And then in March, it was mostly about domestic demand, impacts from layoffs and decreased activity and things like that. And really in April, it seems like the market's been really focused on supply disruption and the impact of some of these processing plants having to shut down temporarily or others having to pull back and run at lower than normal capacity, just to put in procedures in place to kind of space things out and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So it's been crazy.
Yeah. And there's a lot of fear out there, and some of it's speculative. I mean, people anticipating, I suppose, shortages, or we see what they did to toilet paper, in the grocery stores. So that certainly is not helping the situation, is it?
No, we're learning a lot about consumers, I think, and there's no question that there's been some buying ahead. Meaning consumers have been buying products in larger quantities and then making less trips to the grocery and whatnot, and that's impacting some. The other thing, Tim, that I think we've got to remember too is we've also seen a major shift away from food service and towards at-home consumption. So we're replacing some of that food service demand with at-home demand. So I think both of those together have kind of driven us where we are right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kenny, I know that not long ago you were a part of a national team that took a look at the beef cattle industry and what to expect as far as losses related to this COVID-19 pandemic. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. So timing's hard to remember, but several weeks ago, Colin Woodall at National Cattlemen's Beef Association reached out to Daryl Peel, who Daryl is a livestock economist, kind of does something similar to what I do. He's at Oklahoma State, and he wanted Daryl to put together and chair a team that would try and estimate the total impact of COVID-19 in terms of economic loss to the cattle sector. So that's what I was able to be part of. And it was a really, really interesting process. We learned a lot, tried to utilize price forecast, futures, and estimates on number of cattle to try and look at actually how much loss there was going to be to the cattle sector from COVID-19. And you've seen the report, I'm sure, but in excess of $13 billion across the cow-calf, the stocker, background, and the feedlot sectors.
Mm-hmm. Those big numbers. I know you and I talked earlier about the per head loss. Certainly daunting figures by no means, but it's good to get a sort of an estimate of this. I know there was a huge stimulus package, the acronym CARES Act, that Congress passed not too long ago. And this information will be very helpful to folks, say, at the USDA as they decide where to distribute a lot of those funds. Is that correct?
Exactly. I think that was the reason that NCBA reached out in the first place, is they wanted something that they could use to get an understanding for how big the actual loss was going to be. So as they interacted with USDA about the provisions in that CARES Act, they had kind of a base from which to work.
Kenny, just out of curiosity, do we know of any other sector that I would assume probably so, but do we know are other sectors sort of taking this same path to sort of get a handle on where they are or where they might be in order to make better decisions as we move forward?
Absolutely. The losses, the impact have been pretty much across the board. I deal mostly in the livestock arena, but we've certainly seen impacts. We've certainly seen them in beef cattle. We've seen them in dairy. We've seen them in pork, and we're even seeing them in poultry. So I think all sectors are impacted, and I think they're all trying to look at what those implications are going to be.
Mm-hmm. I think, and I look at a lot of news outlets, throughout each day. I think one of the things that consumers might be afraid of is that we're going to run out of food, in particular meat. And my thought is that we may have some disruption from some processors that may have shut down, but we're far from running out of food. Is that a good assumption?
That would be my take on it as well, Tim. We have a very, very good, very efficient food system in the United States. And, I think there's different ways to look at it. There's been a lot of attention placed on plants that have had to close temporarily due to labor issues. But if you look at the reduction in capacity from those that have actually had to shut down, versus the ones that are operating, we've actually pulled back more than just the closures. And I think it's because a lot of the other plants are taking the approach. We're going to slow down. We're going to probably do things like I'm guessing maybe add some cleaning shifts, maybe space some people out, slow things down, so they can prevent issues and then hopefully not have to shut down in the future. Mm-hmm. This did hit us too at a time when production across pretty much all meats was fairly high. Mm-hmm. So that's made the price impact probably greater because of that. But beef production, pork production, poultry production were all going to be up pretty significantly, especially the first half of 2020.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. With all that said, Kenny, looking more closer to home in Kentucky, most of our farms are smaller farms, and we have. I guess I was a little surprised to discover the number of processors, small processors that we have right here in the state. We talked about that a little bit. We're lucky in that fact, I would suppose.
Yeah, we've got several USDA inspected processing plants and several that do what we call custom work. And that they stay pretty booked up. But one thing that I have kind of heard, mostly anecdotally, we talked about, Tim, is that a lot of producers that I know that do some direct marketing, that sell through farmers markets, or that just reach direct to consumer markets, several of them have told me that they've actually had increased interest from consumers in coming to them and trying to source beef directly off the farm. So we may see an increase in that. And if that's the case, it's going to, hopefully open up some possibility for some of those local processors to do some of that type of work. Now they stay fairly full, those processors do, but I think there may be some potential for that as a result of this.
Our family, speaking from our standpoint, buying locally like that's something that we've done for quite some time. But everybody that I've talked to in that arena that do that either from the farm or consumers that are doing that maybe for the first time, we see a lot of attention now toward buying directly, buying local, which obviously it's a bad time for all sectors, but that's maybe a silver lining there for the folks in Kentucky. Do you think?
There's definitely that possibility. The buy local trend was certainly there already. And, I do think what we're dealing with right now at the retail level is probably just going to make that even more so the case right now. So I definitely think there's going to be some producers that are able to kind of capitalize on this and develop their markets somewhat.
Mm-hmm. I guess in a perfect world, once this pandemic passes by, and we know that it will. I guess for a lot of those folks, especially in the smaller direct marketing arena, I would think they would want some of that to stick around. And for consumers, I know for us, maybe some products that we hadn't bought from local producers before we are now. I don't see I think we'll continue that. It's good service. It's really good food, and it certainly helps support our local farmers. Do you think that may be the case at some point once we get past this?
It'll be interesting to see. There's no question that there's more interest now, and I think the real question comes down to how sustainable is that going to be after that, right? After this, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of that comes down to how long it lasts. We oftentimes say consumers have fairly short memories, and that may or may not be a fair statement.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the longer the longer we have to work through this, then I think the more likely that we see those things kind of stick around.
Mm-hmm.
On the same note, remember that even if it only opens up a few doors for an individual farmer, once they get their foot in that door, that they may well be able to keep those customers longer term, even if we're not dealing with the supply concerns we are right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you think another thing that works to our advantage? Kentucky is a very strong beef cattle state, largest east of the Mississippi. Not that there would ever be a good time for this to happen, but as far as the strength of the industry, that really, I would think, plays well during this time, don't you think?
The cattle sector has always been a very strong and resilient sector. And, it's true in Kentucky, but it's true across the U.S. We are a very strong sector. We tend to be independent. We tend to do things our way. And that does, I think, work in our favor in times like this. There's challenges out there for sure. But, I have no doubt that, we're going to emerge from this as a very strong sector.
And another thing, too, I always try to look for the positive, and I know it's very difficult to do so. But we've got a lot of resources here in the state, obviously extension throughout the state and every county. We've got very strong commodity groups. We've got, and we all work together. So that really has to play well, too, during this time. I know that they've all got to be talking right now to each other, sort of helping each other out. Has that been your take on it?
Absolutely, Tim. And I think the fact that you and I are having this conversation now is kind of evidence of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're very lucky in Kentucky to have so many different groups that are supporting agriculture. But I think we're even luckier that all the players within those different groups work so well together. And they really have that common goal to improve agriculture in the state. And when you've got that common goal and those resources in place, I think it's only good for the Commonwealth.
Mm-hmm. Kenny, one more question, if you don't mind. And I know I spoke of speculating earlier, and I know we don't really want to do that, but at some point this will pass. We will come out on the other end of it. Are there some things that maybe we can do now that will help once we get to that point, as far as ensuring we've got plenty of livestock out there, moving in the right direction, doing all the right things? What can we do now to help that out?
Well, I think the biggest thing is, I've told a lot of people, don't totally abandon, your typical marketing plan out of fear. And that happens a lot of times. This was a real shock for a lot of us. And, the impact's big. There's no way to sugarcoat that. But, you can sometimes make things like this worse when you react or do something in panic or out of fear. So I think you were trying to avoid doing those sort of things. I think you want to think long term. You've got to be thinking about, okay, where do I want to be a year from now, 2 years from now? Anytime you've got a situation like this in the marketplace, there are sometimes opportunities. You've talked about things like direct marketing. That may be an opportunity for some folks. When cattle prices do decline, there are people that'll take advantage of that in the form of they'll look at it as an opportunity to buy some calves, to buy some heifers, to buy some cows, and things like that sometimes make sense. The third thing that I would say, though, is I do think it's a lesson for us that there are things that are just really impossible to predict. And this is kind of one of those black swan events we talk about. Mm-hmm. And I think, you have to kind of put a plug in here for risk management in the sense we've got to be thinking long term about doing things in the market, whether that be contracting, futures and options, utilizing LRP insurance, things like that we can do to try and protect ourselves from market shocks like this, because these kind of things are just impossible to predict.
Mm-hmm. And of course, our farmers are no one's better at working through adversity, and they keep going no matter what comes their way. We're very lucky to have not just farmers here, but across the country that are still out there, as we say, still farming.
Absolutely. No question about that.
Kenny Burdine, our guest today on Candid Conversation. Kenny from University of Kentucky, we certainly appreciate so much the visit today, and we appreciate all our viewers out there. Again, we'd like to remind you that if you like this show and have seen it before, please go log on to our many social media platforms. You can view these and other episodes along with other information that Kentucky Farm Bureau has out there. We appreciate it so much. Kenny, good to see you again. We want everybody to stay safe out there, and we will see you again soon on KFB's Candid Conversation.